Let's speak now to the founder and executive director of the national security think tank, the Henry Jackson Society, Dr. Alan Mendoza. Alan, good to have you on board as always. We'll get to this judge in a minute, which I think is a really disconcerting situation. But first, your reaction to this report from the Community Security Trust on this explosion of anti-Semitism in this country. What the hell is going on?
Well, it's a totally disastrous report, of course, in terms of the statistics. It's terrifying for Jews in this country. It should be terrifying for everyone in this country that this degree of hate has suddenly exploded on account of a foreign policy issue, essentially. But is it any surprise, Kev? You know, we've seen those marches. We've seen them for weeks and weeks on end. The issues that have come up in those marches, things that have happened around the marches as well, with attacks on Jews, physical attacks, verbal attacks, social media attacks in this way. So, you know, the one thing obviously led to the other. You could see the results of the survey coming out from the actions that we've seen on our screens in real life. And I'm afraid the fact that we didn't, as a country, stand up to this earlier means that we are now reaping the winds that have been sown in that regard. And unfortunately, we need to be looking very carefully at what this means for us as a country going forwards.
Yeah, on that note, Alan, something I really want to speak to you about, and which I think is symptomatic of the emboldening of a particular community who now think that they are untouchable, is the concept of Muslim Vote, an organisation that I understand is being led by a man who is involved with Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is, of course, a prescribed organisation. And a few things that have happened recently, the protests outside of Tobias Ellwood's house in Bournemouth, he's the MP for Bournemouth, because he has taken a very pro-Israel stance. The fact that Mike Freer, the MP for Golders Green, has said he's got to stand down because his constituency office has been set on fire and he received death threats. And now you have these posters going up around North Ilford, the constituency of Wes Streeting, with the threat that, well, we will unseat him and various other Labour MPs unless Labour call for a ceasefire. It seems to me increasingly the tail is wagging the dog, and that frightens me.
Well, it should frighten everyone in this country who's a supporter of democracy. In democracies, people organise, they lobby for things, they argue for things, they make a case in a logical and clear fashion. What they don't do is stoop to repression and intimidation and violence in this way. And I think it was Rachel Reeves who, the last time there was a ceasefire vote in Parliament, came out the weekend after when numerous Labour MPs who had dared to vote against this line, dared to suggest that they weren't in favour of a ceasefire immediately, were then targeted in their homes and other places. She came out on national TV quite rightly and said, this is not protest, this is intimidation, it must stop. I think it's incumbent on all our political leaders to stand up to these thugs and say, this is not how we conduct our business in Britain. This is not how politics happens in this country. And we are all going to take a stand collectively against you and cast you out in the same way that we would cast out far-right thugs who have tried to intimidate people in the dim and distant past in this country as well. This is no different, is it? It's intimidation, it's thuggery, and it needs to stop.
Alan, let me get your take on this issue surrounding this judge. His name is Tanwar Ikram, and he presided over the case of the three women who joined a pro-Palestinian march very shortly after the October the 7th atrocity. There he is. And they were found guilty of supporting a prescribed terrorist group, Hamas, because on the back of their jackets they had paragliders, pictures of paragliders. Of course, Hamas used paragliders to cross the Israeli border and commit their October the 7th genocide. So they're found guilty of this offence. The judge basically said, well, he didn't basically say, he did say this. He said, well, you've learned your lesson, there won't be any punishment, but don't you do that again. Subsequently, he is a Muslim, but that shouldn't necessarily be a factor in our discussion. But he has been found to have liked social media posts, one saying that Israel is a terrorist country. So he has a history of this. And so the accusation is he let his own prejudices affect what he did with these three women. Downing Street said this is very concerning. Former Justice Minister Robert Buckland said, you know, judges cannot act like this. What my point is I'm not saying this is a case of this, but if we get to the point where judges are letting their own anti-Israel prejudices affect their verdicts, affect their judgments. We are in big trouble, not only as a country, but
I think it's important to point out, though, that he has actually, since then, stated that he liked this post accidentally. Make of that what you will, but that is what he has said.
That's what he's saying. What do you make of this?
Well, British justice needs to be both impartial and seen to be impartial. That's what makes the justice system a trusted system in this country. And judges of all backgrounds, of all faiths, have always, it seems, managed or usually managed to steer that line very carefully. And I don't know, how someone accidentally likes a post like that. What are they reading, frankly, in their feeds to get that in the first place? What algorithm are they on? But the reality is that he shouldn't have, been expressing his political views as a judge anyway. That seems to me a very dangerous slope to be going down. But secondly, having done so and having not investigated his mistaken like beforehand, he should have recused himself from the case. The idea that somebody who's made a political judgment, even accidentally, can then hear a case on a big political issue like this, which is, of course, let's not forget, a terrorism case, ultimately. That, to me, seems wholly ridiculous. And this judgment clearly needs to be revoked, and he needs to be hauled over the coals by the judicial commission that looks at these things. And connected to that is, of course, the fact that if you're looking at this particular issue, this is a terrorism case. I cannot recall a single terrorism case in this country where somebody's been found guilty of a terrorism case and then has been given essentially a discharge on that basis. That is a terrible, terrible sign to be sending out regarding national security and what is tolerable. And if we go down the path of, well, I didn't think that terrorism issue was too bad, you're going to undermine completely the activities of law enforcement in this country and for the judicial system when it comes to actually looking at terrorism as an issue here.